now, economically in a great time. Looking at 2021, we had, as I've mentioned before, over $8 billion of investment coming into the state of Indiana, and this year, or last year, 2022, more than $22 billion, and we look forward to that continuing. I think there's a point in time right now where people are recognizing both the Midwest and how competitive Indiana is, and we want to try and continue to capitalize on that. You'll see, I think you'll notice a lot of the governor's issues align with what the Senate's trying to do with regard to being fiscally responsible, driving health care, both costs and the health of Hoosiers across the state of Indiana, as well as the public safety with some of our initiatives, and of course ours is another one, data privacy, which I don't think he mentioned, but just appreciate the governor's leadership, looking forward to working with him on all of his initiatives, and I think come toward the end of April when we finish up our legislative session and finalize a budget, we'll have a great story to tell. So I think the speaker has some words as well, then we'll take questions.
Thank you, Senator Bray. I would agree. I appreciate the governor's comments today, talking about the momentum that Indiana has, not just across the Midwest, but across the country. So many things are trending in the right direction, and our goal at the end of this legislative session is to make sure that as he noted, that we continue to build on those efforts and create an even better place for people to live and raise their families and to work. So we'll work in cooperation with our Senate colleagues in the governor's office to make sure we have a successful session. So with that, we'll take your questions.
There was an enthusiastic ovation from the Democrats for his free textbook plan. A little less enthusiastic from the Republican side. Is that going to be a tough sell for your caucuses?
We'll have to talk about it. Obviously, K through 12 public education is super important. As we all know, it's the most largest line item in the budget and will continue to be. And so that's part and parcel of that conversation. Whether or not we can get to that with the textbooks is something we'll talk about in our caucus, and I'm sure the House will as well.
Similar question on the overall K through 12 base funding that he wants, currently the $1.157 billion. Where are your caucuses on that number?
Well, I remind people all the time, we spend almost half the state budget goes into education. I would K-12 education. I expect that to be the case again this year. I would expect our budget will be similar to the governor's. And we'll work to make sure we provide proper increases and give parents more flexibility in regards to where they send their children. So we expect a strong education budget.
When we talked to you all around Organization Day, there was some hesitation at the number for public health funding. That request has come down a little bit. What's the temperature of the caucuses for that kind of dramatically different, unprecedented infusion into the public health system?
I think Dr. Bach, Senator Kenley have done a really, really good job of talking to our caucuses and talking to the folks to help them understand what the commission did. We recognize additional investments needed. We're going to work with Dr. Bach, Senator Kenley, and I'm sure Chairman Barrett, Chairman Charbonneau, to make sure that we increase additional investments. But we also want to make sure that it's just not about making investments. It's about ensuring the outcome that comes with those investments. So we want to make sure we have metrics for success for all that. But I think we all recognize there needs to be a bigger investment in public health. We just want to make sure that we do that. And the governor's been very clear on this too, about we make sure it's not just an investment, it's about getting the right outcomes.
I want to comment on that as well, just to first of all agree with what the speaker said. With something like that, that's a new thing that the state is. It's some infrastructure we're trying to deliver those public health dollars in a different way, and it is going to be super important for the state of Indiana to do a couple of things. One, set goals for ourselves. Find a way to measure those goals to make sure that what we are doing and the money that the Hoosier dollars that we're investing in this project are actually having the impact that we want them to have, and then hold ourselves accountable if that's not the case. So we have to focus on that.
The governor's budget proposal also includes $300 million for an annual fund for a deal closing fund for the IEDC, another $300 million for your tax credit cap, and there's also a one-time $100 million injection for a fund to purchase land. Where do you stand on those proposals? Are you on the same page? Do you like what the governor proposed?
Well, I think the governor recognizes in those proposals, as what I kind of prefaced in my initial comments, that right now Indiana is poised to continue to get more investment from outside from both companies that are coming in from other countries. They're trying to come back home to the United States, as well as countries or companies across the nation that are looking to the Midwest, and particularly Indiana, as a great place to do business. And so that's what brought in $22 billion of investment this last year in 2022, and we see that continuing for a couple of years. So it's an opportunity to capitalize on that. So that'll certainly be part of the budget and the conversation, but I think we need to recognize that there's a real opportunity to do some nice things that will affect in a positive way Indiana's economy for decades in the future.
Why the skepticism on the governor's textbook plans? Do you agree with what he called it a disguised tax? Do you think that's a proper assessment of those fees?
Tom, I'm not sure I'd say it's skepticism. I think, we want to make sure the mechanics work, and we want to make sure that, like I noted earlier, we're going to have over half, right around half the state budget in K-12 education. We want to make sure that those dollars are used the most effective way. I'm not sure there's skepticism. We're just working through the mechanics of it all and thinking about, the best way to do it.
I want to follow up on Peter's question about all that IEDC money. There's not as much transparency when it comes to the IEDC because they're a quasi-public agency instead of just a regular agency. When you're talking about giving them that much money to do with pretty much however they want, do they need a little more oversight than they currently have?
First of all, I'm going to even add to that number, $500 million for Reading, which is part of it too, which I think is extraordinarily important, and as the governor noted tonight, has been a tremendously successful program. I want to just note that IEDC has been tremendously cooperative with working with Chairman Thompson, with Chairman Mishler, with all of us as they've pursued opportunities, and so I feel very comfortable about that. I think, we are grateful and appreciative for the kind of historic time that we're in right now, and we recognize we need to make additional investments to continue that momentum. But we've had, I feel like a really transparent relationship with them on what's taking place, the opportunities that present themselves, and hopefully what we think will be a very strong 12 to 24 months.
To follow up on that, I mean, I know when there were talks with you guys that it sounds like they've been pretty transparent, but when it comes to like the average citizen being able to keep up with it, like Brandon said, are there going to be any changes in, their kind of transparency to the general public?
Well, obviously IEDC puts out a report, and one of the things that's important in any of these things these are very sensitive negotiations, and so up until the deal gets closed, I mean, it's important that those deals are kept close to the vest, because most of the time you've got multiple entities competing. So they put out an annual report. I mean, we've worked with, in my legislative career, I've worked with IEDC through the years, and they always come in for their budget presentations. We have lots of opportunities to ask questions, but it is a little different just because they're negotiating on very competitive and important deals.
One thing I'll say in addition to that as well, and the conversations that we've had, both the speaker and I and Senator Mishler, is that with any of these investments, we've asked them to focus very closely on the return on their investment. So you'll see the jobs that come in aren't going to be below or even on par necessarily with the county average in which they're landing. These are going to be real opportunities that have a really large return on their investment. That's what we've asked them to focus on, and we'll still have opportunities through the legislative session as well as through the budget committee review to kind of keep an eye on what's going on there.
I want to stay on that topic just a little longer. Specifically, that $150 million the governor wants to put toward essentially a permanent land acquisition fund. This would be sort of like what we're seeing in Boone County. Some of the landowners there are pretty upset over what's going on with that. Are you comfortable with giving IEDC that kind of leeway for land acquisition?
I think some of the landowners are all maybe upset. Most people are thrilled. And so, what Secretary Chambers, Governor Holcomb, and others have told us is it's important to have site-ready, land available and in these deals. And I think this is just, again, this is the nature of competing in a very competitive environment against other states. And I think, what the Boone County example is an excellent example. When you can have the land, you can have the infrastructure all in place. It just is a huge competitive advantage.
mentioned, you threw ready on top of Peter's question earlier. Of all the things you heard from the governor tonight, of all the things in his agenda that he rolled out last week, is a bunch more money for ready the easiest sell for you all?
I don't know if I think our caucus is very supportive of Ready, Brandon, but I think there's a lot of things in the governor's budget that our caucus is excited about. There are things that we'll obviously talk through but I think, this is, he had a very robust budget. We're excited about talking about it all, but clearly Ready impacts all of our communities. You see the momentum that's taking place in places that, as the governor noted today, it's all across the state, and sometimes it's in places that haven't had a tremendous amount of momentum prior to this. So we're excited about Ready and what's doing for our communities across the state.
I'll ask one more.
Okay.
Between your two caucuses then, and not the governor, you talked the other day about, and Senator Mishley talked about wanting to obviously do the $1 billion to pay down 396 that'll take place this fiscal year, but potentially do even more, try and shorten that timeline further. The House is historically, they support that, but has not been quite as eager to spend dollars, more dollars to shorten that timeline any further than it's already shortened. Will that be a source of friction between your two budgets?
Well, anytime you put together a budget of $40 billion, of course, there's differences in ways to spend that. And I don't know, there's some, we obviously have some differences of opinion between one house and the next, but I can tell you, we speak on a constant basis, almost daily, frankly, and that communication is really beneficial. And so while there are some differences on priorities, they're very slight, and we'll certainly be successful in crafting the budget this year, I have no doubt.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, thank you all.
Take care.
I don't want you to have to move.
I
You
appreciate
look
that.
very comfortable.
I am very,
Are you comfortable?
I'm sure your seat is more comfortable, but
Well, I figured you could let Emily have one of the front seats. No? All right, you like being on the side? All right. Mic check, whatever. Everybody good? All right. So we heard a lot of rhetoric today from the governor about how the Indiana General Assembly and some of the decisions we make have impacted Hoosiers across the state. What we didn't hear is the fact that for the last 2 decades, we've come to a time in our state's history where we don't adequately support K through 12 public funding. We are unhealthy. We don't have the educated workforce to attract some of the businesses that we hopefully, because we're the best place to do business from a tax environment standpoint, that we're actually not going to be successful. So what our caucus has been focused on is something that finally the governor has decided that this is something that they want to do. It's real simple. We want to change lives for Hoosiers. And you can do that in combination with making sure that businesses are successful. We want to talk about providing relief to Hoosiers from starting with the high cost, the tax that the governor used today on parents for sending their kids to public school that's supposed to be free. It is supposed to be a tuition-free education, yet we allow some fees, technology and otherwise, to end up costing parents and costing children in the end. So we want to eliminate those. When we see that our economy is so good that we still have people who can't afford housing and who can't afford child care costs, We have childcare deserts across the state where people can't even have access to childcare, yet we still want to continue to invest hundreds of millions of dollars into bringing businesses here. We're saying, from the Democrat policy standpoint, it's time to take a look at households and not just businesses. So with that, I'm willing, and Senator Yoder is here with me today, and we're willing to take any questions that you have.
Based on the responses that you were hearing tonight, how tough a sell do you think are going to be A, the textbook fee repeal, and B, the 1.157 for K through 12?
Let's talk about the textbook fee. I stood up. I didn't look behind me, but I think everyone in the chamber stood up. We need to put our money where our mouth is. The young lady who had to pay $630 book rental fee for a book that she has a turn. It kind of reminds me of when we used to go to college and they tell us the book was $100, and then you try to go sell it back and they say they're going to give you $5. And then you go back the next year, you find somebody on campus who has that same book that you had because you saw the notes, and they just paid $95. Kind of reminds me of that little program. Parents deserve better. And if the state of Indiana, if Hoosiers are going to support the state of Indiana to the point where we can have $2.5 billion in reserves, then we could at least provide relief for them so they don't have to pay textbooks and technology fees. The 1.175 billion, I want to give you my view on that. It's about time. If you go back to 2012 and you look at our school funding for public schools, you will see a dip from 2012 to 2015, and then you will see an incremental increase to now. And while we stand here and continue to say it's important because we spend over 50% of our budget on K through 12 education, why can't it be 60%? Education makes the difference in everybody's life. And sometime we're going to have to recognize that our traditional public schools are failing our kids. The lack of teacher pay increases that we've seen. Listen, the governor brought up we are just now getting teachers to be paid $40,000 a year to start. That's sad. And the average being 60,000, maybe we should, understand what the average means. That means there's just as many teachers below that number as there are above. That's nothing to write home about. They should be paid more. We should demand that they get paid more. And that $1.175 billion should be required to send and spend money and give teacher raises. That's the way I feel about it.
Democrats have long supported more health spending.
Yes.
The governor's certainly asking for an unprecedented infusion into the public health system. The Republican leaders just talked about how they want to make sure that there are metrics for success that come along with that money. Are you concerned at all, not about the level of spending, but about how those dollars are going to be spent?
Well, we should definitely be looking at how Indiana is at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to public health outcomes. When we hear from the governor that we have a AAA rating when it comes to bonds, I couldn't help but think as I sat there, how and what does that mean for the mom of a child who is sick, an infant born prematurely, who cannot access or afford the health care that's necessary? I couldn't help think about the parent whose son died prematurely because of suicide. I couldn't help but think about a AAA rating and what that means to the parent who wants desperately to help their child achieve more than what they did and have them have a better shot at life, whether that's accessing a career in the trades or a 4-year education at one of our outstanding universities. We talked a lot about what that means, and I'm not sure it really means so much to Hoosiers when it comes to that AAA rating. When Hoosiers are trying to put food on the table, pay their bills, find affordable housing, and afford childcare. It's been that difficult for Hoosiers. So that is a real struggle, and I know that our county health officials are struggling throughout Indiana on how to respond to some of these abysmal public health outcomes. So that's where my thought process was when, as I was listening to some of the governor's comments, and I expect many Hoosiers were thinking the same.
What do you see as the connection between brain drain and Indiana's recent culture war-related bills, such as abortion and the Trans Act?
I think we'll absolutely see this. Right now, we're waiting to hear how the courts will decide with SB 1. I was struck by one of the quotes. I wrote it down in the governor's speech, and I think it was something along the lines of, we've controlled the rate at which the size of government. And I thought, we, in this legislature, have controlled more than that. And whether we're talking about young people wanting to stay in Indiana and call Indiana home, how businesses will attract talent to Indiana if SB 1 stands, and the current healthcare provider shortages that we already have throughout Indiana. SB 1 is certainly not a welcome mat there. The ambiguity that SB 1 put forth for so many health providers in this state will only drive down those outcomes even more.
In your minds, what was the most glaring omission from the governor's speech?
Well, the one thing that I just still have not understood was the discussion of cannabis in the state of Indiana. You know, the governor, I don't know if he got caught on a hot mic or somebody caught him in the right mood, said that we would look at decriminalization. He doesn't think somebody should pay the ultimate price for indiscretion as a child or when they were young. It's a real simple solution to that. You could either legalize it or decriminalize a certain amount. And I really hope that they are having those discussions, because one of the things that you'll see in the governor's budget proposal is an $800 million investment into a prison. I mean, to me, it's simple putting your money where your mouth is. They're requesting $800 million for renovations to a prison. And guess what? If we were to legalize some form of marijuana or cannabis legislation, we could pay for it and probably release so many people who are behind bars for simple possession. But that was what I thought was glaring. I think the people of the state of Indiana have overwhelming, there's like 85% of Hoosiers believe that we should have some form of legal cannabis in the state of Indiana, and it would be a revenue generator to the state.
Senator Yoder, how about you? The most glaring omission?
I think I spoke to it a moment ago of where I thought there was a real gap in truly addressing the brain drain and what is to come. We're going to see how SB 1 stands in the courts, but without true addressing the healthcare issue and access, affordability in the state of Indiana, we are doing a disservice to Hoosiers across the state.
Do you think the
That's a good question. I think I said this 2 years ago. Some of you who were here might have heard me say this. I find myself in a very interesting situation, supporting a lot of the projects that the governor wants to do, while his own political party colleagues are questioning whether or not we should do certain things. Listen, textbook fees, 21st Century Scholar, automatic enrollment, decriminalization of small amounts of cannabis. I think if you were to poll 80% of Hoosiers, we'd be all on board with that. But again, and we've seen this just recently in Washington, D.C., when you have so much power and then you got a little fraction of people who want to control that power, you can't get anything done. And what I find, I think the governor's got a long way to go. And as I've said, I find myself in the same position I was in 2020. I support a lot of things that are in his budget. Not everything, but we'll see how it goes. But I think he's got a long way to go to get my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to support it.
Oh, sure. As a follow-up on brain drain, he had a quote in his speech about how high wage job opportunities were the quote, the best way to keep our kids close to home, and it seems like your caucus is saying that's like things like the economy is not enough for that.
I do teach young people in my district, and while salaries are definitely important, I mean, you have to pay your bills. You also want to be able to live somewhere where you feel like you're fully valued, that your dignity is there. And what we saw this past summer in that special session, I believe, put a real question mark for many Hoosiers on whether or not that's true. And so as young people decide where they want to call home, where they want to start their families, I think this is a real disconnect for many Hoosiers on how are we going to bridge that gap when it comes to that brain drain.
You know, I was reading some literature in Forbes magazine that the governor actually quoted, and the generation that we're talking about attracting to the state of Indiana for these jobs, they look at lifestyle differences first before they even look at wages. There are many people who are choosing lifestyle over dollars. That means hybrid work schedules, living in communities where they feel free to be who they are, what they have, the freedoms that they have. And quite frankly, it's right up there with wages. I mean, the cost to live the way I did when I was younger is almost 40% higher. And the next generation of workers or people are not looking at that as a necessity. They will take the lower wage job to stay in communities where their activities and their lifestyles are accepted. And I challenge you to go to the business community and ask them that question. Those $70 and $50 an hour jobs, forget that. Let's just go to the IDC. Look at their own data. The jobs that come to the state of Indiana that get filled are $25 an hour and less. Their own data even shows that after you hit the $27, $28 mark, those jobs, 60% of them are not filled. So how can we think that wages, increase in the wages is gonna actually, it will incentivize people, yes. You have to pay your bills. But lifestyle is definitely at the top of the list from what I understand. And I think that's what we've seen, actually. Well, thank you all.
Thanks very much.
All right.